Welcome to IFAS St. Lucie County Extension. We're off on another adventure, and today we're going to learn about how to tame our invasives. So invasives are extremely important to learn about because we have a lot of them in this area. We have invasives like plants, unwanted little guys, because a weed is an unwanted plant. So we have lots of those in the area, and then of course we have all kinds of critters too that can all of a sudden surface, and there seems to be lots of them, whether they're ants or something else. But I think what's important is that we identify them and figure out how we can manage them. And today I have with me an expert on all of these types of issues, Ken Joelle. He's our natural resource agent for St. Lucie County. Welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Anita, for inviting me on the show.
Yeah.
And what is your definition of an invasive species?
Well, I kind of think of an invasive species as a species that's probably not native, perhaps can be native, but in most cases they're not necessarily born and raised here, that they may have come from other places, and because they don't have some of the things that would have kept them in check, perhaps if they came from like Australia or Germany, then now they're out of control because there's nothing to keep them in control. So those are some of the things I think of when I think of invasive.
When I use the term invasive species, sometimes I have to differentiate that from the word weed because, you know,
unwanted plant.
They're very similar. However, with an invasive species, in this case, the invasive plant, it's a plant that originated from somewhere else outside of Florida, has established itself here, and is breeding uncontrollably, and has economic and environmental impacts. So, whereas a weed is something that might be native here and has environmental impact, but maybe not quite so severe. And to give us an example of a plant that might be considered a weed by some people is the grapevines.
Yeah.
You know, there's wildlife benefit to that, but for people who are managing natural spaces, those grapevines can crawl over a lot of sable palms and some of our native species out there. So, you know, it's definitely not invasive because it came from outside of Florida.
Right.
And,
but it's an unwanted plant in the perception of many others.
Some, not all.
Not all.
And for wildlife lovers like me and you, we know that birds and others like to eat that. But, but with the invasive species problem, they originate from someplace outside of Florida. And one of the issues that we have here in Florida, we have a lot of port traffic. A lot of people are coming from outside of the U.S., they're coming from outside of the state of Florida, and when that happens, sometimes they unintentionally carry seeds in with them or insects.
Right,
and
right. And our inspections that happen at our port systems are only just so good because you don't have enough people, really.
It's a lot of cargo coming in.
Right, a lot of cargo, a lot of people. And you're right, we get things from all over, and we've got insects here and plants here that have come through those various means. And an example is one that you've worked with is the imported fire ant.
Yeah.
You know, that came in through our ships, you know, in the hulls. And so, yeah, and we've got the Africanized honeybee that's, again, another one that's come in here. So, and we've got the Brazilian pepper, I think, that
I'm glad you bring that up.
Okay, yeah.
You know, there was a time where that was introduced on purpose.
It was, absolutely.
Obviously from South America, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, that part of the world. And it was brought in here because it looked like holly and it didn't take any fertilizer once you put it in the ground.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was at one time planted as a landscape plant.
Right.
That was before we knew how bad it was.
Right.
And I actually have a sample here. And this is a sample with, it's in water, so I'm going to shake some of the water. But this is an extremely healthy Brazilian pepper.
Very much so. You can see the berries on there, and the berries are exactly what they were looking for. And in fact, some people call this Florida holly. Yeah, I've had a lot of people say, "Hey, the Florida holly," when we actually have a native Florida holly in this area, but it's not the Brazilian pepper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they superficially look similar, and they have the berries at around the same time of year.
Yeah.
So people can expect Brazilian pepper to fruit probably November, or the end of October, November, December, through the winter months, and then it stays dormant through part of the year, and then it starts flowering again. So when it's setting its fruit, it's the same time you'd expect to see the native holly.
Yeah, the hollies.
So that's one of the big difference, you know, that's one of the similarities rather.
Yeah.
It is related to poison ivy, which, you know, I'm holding on to this thing and hopefully I won't have a rash after, but it is related to poison ivy. And the birds and other wildlife tend to spread these seeds. So you see these berries on it. As the berries start to ripen and ferment, the birds, the raccoons, and other critters out there, they love to get in there and eat those fermenting berries. And with birds in particular, the robins will just swarm all over these Brazilian pepper trees. And it's almost like they're attacking the trees. They get in there, eat as many berries as their stomachs can hold, and it gets them drunk because they're fermenting.
Right.
And then they fly in a drunken wobble flight pattern up to utility lines and fence rows, places like that. And the seeds get passed out in their droppings.
Kind of like a nice little packet.
Yeah.
Fertilizer packet.
Yeah. And actually the feces probably do fertilize the seeds.
Sure.
So, that's one of the issues is wildlife does spread these. And when people go to control the plants, there are some over-the-counter products that people can use. Glyphosate products are helpful.
Which is also known as like Roundup.
Yeah, but we don't want to give too many brands out because there are a lot of...
I think sometimes people don't know there's another name. So glyphosate is the name, it's the chemical.
Yeah. What they can do is they can go to a garden center and they can ask for glyphosate or glyphosate products like Roundup or Touchdown, or there are many different types.
Many different types that carry glyphosate.
Yeah, and so what they'll do, there are 3 general ways that people can manage Brazilian pepper. They can cut the stump, they can cut the tree.
Or cut the tree right off.
Right down, is within 3 inches of the ground.
Okay.
And within 5 minutes, they have to get in there and they use an herbicide on that cut stump.
Okay, like the glyphosate.
Like the glyphosate products, or triclopyr, which is another, brush begone, and some other types of products like that. And so they basically apply the herbicide to the cut stump, and then hopefully that sap has not sealed that wound, and the
They have
herbicide,
to do it quickly.
They have to do it very fast, within 5 minutes or less.
5 minutes, wow.
If they don't do it fast enough, that tree, the trunk, blocks that herbicide, the sap blocks the herbicide from getting down into the root system, and it's just not quite as effective. So the best time of year that I've found in my experience to control these, it's when it's flowering. Because
so that would be the spring?
Yeah, no, it would be, I would say September, October, when it's flowering. And one of the problems with controlling it right now is, let's say you cut the tree down and you drag the canopy curbside, or
all these
little berries are going to pop off.
Yeah.
And every berry has the potential to become a new tree.
Okay.
So it's better to keep the contamination, the seed source, in one location, and just treat that as the sprouts come up, rather than fight it everywhere you've dragged the tree.
Yeah, all the way through your yard.
So, and also for those of us that are biologists, we know that it's got compound leaves. So this is actually one leaf. And it's hard to tell on this camera, but that thing that looks like a stem is actually leaf. There's leaf material on it.
Right.
And this is the part that might make people itchy. And right here during the holiday season, everybody's going around thinking about holiday wreaths, Christmas wreaths, and things like that. So what they'll do, I've seen this happen, where instead of using holly cuttings, they've gone and taken Brazilian pepper and they've tried turning these into wreaths. And I've seen people that have tried doing that. Little do they realize that they're bringing something that could be a relative of poison ivy into their home.
Into their home.
So it's not a good idea to do that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I first came down to this part of Florida, these plants were, of course, in all the vacant lots around, and I didn't really pay any attention to them until they berried.
Yeah.
And then there was these beautiful red berries. So I used them in my decoration in my home. And I, of course, never had any problem. But yes, and so people that aren't familiar, this is really important for them to know, because like myself, they probably just thought, oh, this is a really neat plant that's native here, and not knowing it wasn't
It looks
native.
festive.
Yeah, it did. And so and of course, that's why someone brought it initially.
So, people can use a cut stump treatment. There's also a foliar spray, so somebody can use an herbicide product to apply it to foliage. However, when you have Brazilian pepper that's fully grown, you don't want to use them. It takes a lot of herbicide to do that.
Okay.
So if you have small little seedlings sprouting up,
then
you can
go ahead and do that.
But it might just be as easy to go ahead and pull them up.
Right.
And the other method is to use an oil-based product. Triclopyr esters that's the common name for it. Pathfinder 2, Garland 4. And what you do with that herbicide is you mix it with an oil, vegetable-based oil. The old-timers use diesel. We don't do that anymore.
No.
And what they do is they mix it, usually a 10% solution. They read and follow the label directions. And the triclopyr ester herbicide soaks in through the bark of the tree, and over a course of a month, the herbicide translocates throughout the entire tree and will kill the tree off.
And is there a better time to do that application as well?
You can do that pretty much any time of the year. Probably the most effective time is when it has the flowers.
Okay.
So once again, September,
September,
October.
October.
So I'll just set that aside.
Okay.
And of course, we've got publications on all of these.
Right, right. So you can get more information. Well, I know Brazilian pepper's a problem that happens in many vacant lots, and because the birds and other critters carry the seeds everywhere.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of plant materials that are invasives, and I know you brought some more with you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more of some of the ones that you've brought.
Yeah, I've only got a couple, only a few here. But this little weed, you know what this is, don't you?
Caesar's weed, right?
Yeah, Caesar's weed. And when people are walking around in natural areas, and if they see the stickers, they get the stickers on them, those little burrs and things.
Yeah, I can see the stickers on here. It's right where the flower used to be.
Yeah, and you can see there's a little pink flower on it. It looks almost like a miniature hibiscus. And when these plants are out there, it's considered to be a weed, but it's also invasive. And you can tell whether it's invasive or not. There are lists. The Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council has a list of Category 1. Those are the worst of the worst. And the Category 2 invasive plants.
And they have like the potential to become invasive. Is that how that
No,
works?
they're both invasive.
Okay.
But the Category 1s have the most environmental damage.
I see.
The Category 2s, they're bad, but the damage is not nearly as bad as the Category 1s. Brazilian pepper was a Category 1.
Okay.
I believe this is a Category 2, but I'd have to look this up. And the bad thing about this particular plant is when you go to get rid of it, all these little stickers get on everything. And I've made the mistake of using a machete before, and
they stick to the machete?
well, it's a very fibrous tree, or it's a shrub actually.
Right.
And when you go and whack it with the machete, it doesn't really knock it down. You have to have a really sharp blade to do that. But it recoils, and in the recoil, all these little stickers pop back on you. So the very first time I dealt with this plant, I learned pretty quickly not to take a machete to it.
So it has its own defenses, doesn't it?
It does. It took me about an hour to pick all the stickers off. But basically what people can do is they can weed whack it down, mow it down. But you really want to keep the contamination in one site.
Okay.
So that's another invasive plant. And this was something that I just kind of pulled in as I was driving into work this morning. I saw it on the side of the road.
And they're very common. You're right. They're very common.
Yeah, very common.
Yeah.
So another in our basket of weeds that we have here is this. Oh, and look at these, Anita. It's got some insects on there.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah. But which is a PhD and somebody who's studied for. You're probably just as interested in the insects on here as you are the plants.
Of course. We'll talk about the plant though.
Yeah. This particular plant is Casuarina. It's the Australian pine, and it is actually. It looks like a pine tree, but it's not.
Right.
It originated in Australia, came into Florida, and we find a lot of these here in St. Lucie County. We used to find a lot over by Dynamite Point, the Fort Pierce Inland State Recreation Area. But they did a great job of cleaning that up. So,
right.
Yeah, so that's not an issue there. But very often we have some folks in the agriculture community that use it as a windbreak.
Right, they've used it for years. Now they've used different things, but originally this was what they used. That's correct.
But it's a viable, if this is the life or death for somebody's tree crop, then, they might need to use that. But certainly there might also be alternatives out there. But to identify it, it's hard to see it here, but each of these things that look like needles, like pine needles, those are actually little scaled, segmented branchlets, I guess.
Right, yeah.
So it's very easy to confuse these two. And so that's the last. And also one of the things about this plant, and with many of these invasives that we're talking about, when they drop their needles or when they drop their leaves, like Brazilian pepper, that leaf litter actually stops and inhibits other seeds from other plants from germinating. So when you get these plants established, they do have that natural way of repopulating themselves and choking out natives.
Yeah, it's kind of like a substance that they emit.
Yeah,
so
well, it's called an allelopathic substance, and that just rolls off your tongue after you say it a few times.
Yes.
But that's not the case for this plant. But with Brazilian pepper, it's almost like a natural herbicide that's putting into the soil. With this plant, with the Australian pine, the needles get so thick as they drop, you might have half a foot
of just needles. And
nothing else can survive underneath it. So,
kind of like pine trees. Pine trees are the same way. They have needle, natural ground cover, or mulching.
Big difference is pine trees belong here.
Yes,
and
these do not. That's correct.
So these are just some of the invasive plants that we have here in St. Lucie County, and any of the environmental centers in St. Lucie County, the Oxbow Eco Center on St. James, Manatee Center, any of the environmental centers in St. Lucie County, Savannah's Preserve State Park, they can give you some advice, but certainly at the Extension Office, we would help provide the advice as well.
Right.
So,
Well, and I know that you've been working with another one that's a real problem. It's called the air potato vine.
Yes.
And, kind of a heart-shaped vine. And I know you've got a natural control. And I think that's part of what we look at is when we talk about biological control is looking at natural critters that came from, like where some of these plants came from, what can control it naturally. So I know that there's been one that's been successfully found to control this air potato. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that insect. I believe it's an insect that...
Yeah. Air potato is one of those noxious vining weeds, and when it gets a foothold, it just chokes out the native vegetation underneath it, and they
just
produce
kind of completely covers it up.
It
right?
really does. A lot of these, old world climbing fern is another one that's really bad like that. But with air potato, it produces these bulbils. They look like potatoes.
Little round.
Yeah.
Kind of round.
Well, they start out pea-sized. They can even be smaller than that. But as they mature, they can be the size of softballs.
Wow.
And they get so heavy that they fall to the ground, and then new vines sprout from there. So it was almost impossible for all those bulbils to be picked up and collected, and it was hard for the management agencies to get in there and kill the vines off using herbicides. A lot of these vines were growing in thick natural areas where a lot of saw palmetto that'll cut you up. So they had to come up with some alternative way of managing air potato, and they found the air potato leaf beetle. It's host specific to air potato. They're raising them at 3 sites in Florida. Here in Fort Pierce, we have a site at the Indian River Research and Education Center. Dr. Bill Overholt is raising some. Down at USDA, down in Fort Lauderdale, they're raising down there. And Eric Rowing up in Gainesville.
In Gainesville, right.
Yeah, he's raising some. So there's a website where people can go and they can order those beetles, and they'll be put on a list, and
they're everywhere. I've noticed that whenever I go some places, I'll see if I see the air potato. Sure enough, the leaves are all holes. And
yeah, what happens is it's almost like they turn into Swiss cheese.
They do. Yeah,
they
there's like holes all over, and you can see the beetles are so pretty because they're red.
Yeah, and you can see them.
So, yeah, they look
almost
really
like
nice.
ladybugs.
Yeah.
But the thing that you probably also noticed is they weren't eating anything else out there.
No, that's all they're eating. That's totally, and then I think that's part of what the lab there that you were referring to in Fort Pierce does exactly that. They have to go through a quarantine process when they bring what they consider a biological control agent in, to do that. So
it all has to be USDA certified.
Absolutely. Yeah. We don't want to release something that might be harmful. So another problem for us.
It's a lot of work. And you know what? If they're not comfortable, if the research doesn't pan out, then that gets rejected.
Yep. Go back to square one.
Back to square one.
Yep.
And they've rejected some biocontrol agents for Brazilian pepper. And, we've been talking about that for 25 years.
It would be so wonderful to get something for that. Now, I know there's other invasives. We've talked a lot about plants, but I know that we have some critters that we mentioned the fire ant, but I know there's a lot of other critters that you deal with, and recently you've been dealing with coyotes.
Oh yeah, coyotes are an issue. And the thing about them, their territory is expanding. And they are found throughout all of Florida now, right down into the northern part of the Keys. And they can swim, so they're out on the barrier island. And if you see something that looks like a unusual dog that's not shy and is digging around in the trash, you can't shoo it away easily, it's a possibility it's a coyote. You don't always know from the howl, but yeah, they're here. They're present throughout. We had an issue in St. Lucie County in 2014 where we suspected that they were eating endangered sea turtle nests.
Right, I remember.
And we needed to do some work to see if that was actually the case. So the Florida Master Naturalist, Jerry Bott, Marcia Kopp, they helped out, and they did a great job of putting cameras up. Luann Hastings helped out with that too.
So kind of getting a picture of what's really happening, who's taking the turtle eggs.
Yeah, was it a dog? Was it a raccoon?
Right.
And we did confirm that for the first time in 2014, coyotes were predating the sea turtle nests. So.
Well, I've seen them around in different parts of the county, and you'll see the young pups as well. And so is there something that people need to do to be...
Well, first of all, with the sea turtle issue, don't kill all coyotes. It's just not possible to kill all. And killing coyotes is not something that people want to do. But sometimes you can find out which coyotes are actually destroying those sea turtle nests. And you can create an artificial nest. And what you do is you get chicken eggs and you put them in the ground just like you would a sea turtle nest. And you just let the eggs sit there. And you can put traps out. And that's how you can bait a coyote to the area. So a trapper can then help deal with the problem that way.
Okay.
So lethal methods are not always necessary. And it's a learned behavior with the sea turtle nests. So you want to make sure you're managing the ones that are actually causing the problem.
I see. Okay, so not every coyote.
Not everyone.
Okay.
And that's just not viable. They're everywhere.
But I guess you do need to be aware, like if you have, like in my neighborhood, I have a lot of families that have small dogs. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of people have those retractable leashes where they can go out like 30 feet or something.
And that's
so,
a problem.
Yeah, so if they're out there, you probably want to be really careful with
And
that.
we found when the folks down in Boca Raton on the west coast of Florida, there were some incidents this year
Oh, really?
where they were walking their dogs. And we're talking about the small, like Shih Tzus, things like
Yeah.
that. And they were walking their dogs in the western part of the community near the Everglades, and they were using their retractable leashes. And the coyotes came up from behind, grabbed the dogs, and just kept running. And those retractable leashes did not stop.
Sure.
So that enabled the coyote to get momentum. So what I would recommend that people do if they're concerned about coyotes in their neighborhood,
Yeah.
stop using retractable leashes.
Yeah, use like a 4 or 6 foot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something
And-
that you can actually keep close to you.
And if you have a coyote in the area, pull your dog up out of the ground, hold on to your dog, and be prepared to stand your ground.
Right, right.
Because the coyotes, if they see the dog as a meal, they're
Right.
gonna
They're gonna go
want
after it.
They're gonna go after it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the-
and I know you mentioned also, you've also dealing with like the hogs that we have, which are a
Yeah.
huge problem. Golf courses deal with it.
Yeah.
Homeowners deal with it. At our extension office, we deal
Yeah.
with it. You know, they tear up the ground, you know, looking for all kinds of.
A lot of the times they're going for tubers in the soil. They're looking for carbohydrates.
Okay.
So if you have oak trees with acorns, they love that. They'll just get in there and they'll be eating up the acorns. Redroot, which is a natural area plant, they'll get in there and they'll eat up those plants too. So people sometimes they use that single box trap, but that doesn't work for very long. You might get one immature.
And usually they come in many of them, usually, right? There's like a grouping
No, if you
of them.
use, well, let's kind of back up just a little
Okay.
bit. A single female sow, a feral hog, can give birth within a year of herself being born. She can give birth to 2 litters of piglets twice a year and up to 16 piglets
Wow.
per litter. And those top predators, the bobcats and others, they just can't keep up with that. And so they're able to
Outpopulate,
reproduce, just
yeah.
massive reproduction. And so when you have 2 feral hogs that can turn in potentially 32 in a year, that's a big exponential increase. So sometimes when people do management of feral hogs, they're using those single box traps, and they wise up to it almost immediately. You'll bait it with corn. You might get one young, naive feral hog in there, but once that happens, you'll never get any more feral hogs in that trap again.
Because they've learned.
They've learned from that incident. So corral trapping is the way to go. And if they're corral trapped and relocated off property, that requires a permit to do that.
I see.
If they're taken live to another place. And sometimes game preserves, will accept them. So feral hogs are definitely an issue, but then we also have the pythons.
Yes. Yeah, well, we have
Pythons.
lots of things that have been released into the
Yeah.
environment. I mean, the hogs were brought here a long, long time ago.
Ponce de Leon back
Yeah.
in those settlement days.
Right.
And well, we actually have Eurasian feral hogs, and then we have the feral hogs that were brought in as food sources. So, but it's hard to differentiate between one or the other.
They probably interbred, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, they are.
Yeah.
But with these invasive reptiles, more than likely they're part of the pet trade.
Right.
And when somebody goes and buys a Burmese python that might start out, a couple of feet long, and before you know it, the thing is 15 feet long,
And they don't know where to keep it anymore.
and they might be getting ready to have a baby in the family. You don't want that
Right.
in your house. So sometimes what happens is people let them go. Sometimes they escape, and that's one of the ways that they work their way into the environment. Here in St. Lucie County, we have had some Burmese pythons that have been found. There was a couple in Port St. Lucie. Last year there was an issue the Sheriff's Department was involved with. We are also dealing with those agamas, and those are the lizards that have the red heads. And those are another one of those, released pets. The curly tail lizards that people are seeing everywhere. And people ask me, well, what is the real problem? Well, the real problem is they're eating something out there.
Yeah.
Oh, so what are they eating? They're eating everything else.
Well, isn't that true of invasives, is that they're usually going to displace something that's
Yeah.
native, so that's a problem with them?
Well, look at the Cuban tree frog. The Cuban tree frog is it's the largest of our
Right.
tree frogs. And when they study the gut contents of these Cuban tree frogs, what they find, a lot of beetles in there, but they're also finding the native tree frogs in the stomach.
Wow.
I actually have photographs of a squirrel or green tree frog, the legs were green, sticking out of the mouth of
Wow.
Cuban tree frogs. So they're eating pretty much whatever hops in front of them
Yeah.
that they want to eat. And then the cane toads are another amphibian. And we used to call those bufo toads.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, scientists changed that. They're now called Rhinella marina. It used to be Bufo marinus.
Mariners, right.
But there are a lot of bufos.
There
and
are. And there's
a
some
lot
native
and
ones.
that's the genus.
Yeah.
And there are some natives,
Yeah.
and that kind of gave all the bufos a bad name. So the scientists have a new categorization, and they're Rhinella, but we just refer to them as the cane toads.
Okay.
And those are the ones that can harm your dogs. So
Or cats, right?
Yeah.
Whatever
So-
might pick it up in its mouth.
yeah, so the recommendation for that, they're usually attracted to protein. So pick up the dog droppings. If you let your pets use the bathroom in their backyard, well, that's food for those cane toads. And they'll get in there and they will eat the dog droppings and the cat droppings. So you want to make sure all that is sanitized. You want to clean it up. The other thing is to watch your pets when you bring them outside. Sometimes you'll feed your pets outside. You leave the dog bowl or the cat bowl out. Little
Yeah.
scraps of food could attract those the cane toads in.
Right.
So you want to make sure you're doing that someplace safe,
Right.
and that you're watching your animals when they're outside.
I remember we had one, it was up in had gutters on the side of the house, and the gutter came down, and that's where he went up in every
Oh, he was
night.
hiding in there?
Yeah, he was hiding up in there, so I caught him one day, and, and
these-
then put him in the freezer like you had told me to do.
Well, these cane toads, we're not talking about those little toads that
no,
get
this
that.
was really big.
They get to be that big.
Yeah, this was really big.
And I've seen them actually in dog bowls, and their whole body overlaps over the dog bowl.
Oh my gosh.
Because they're that big. And when you let your pet outside in the morning, the first thing that they do is they'll go to the pet bowl.
Right.
And the cane toad's sitting in there.
Yep.
And they secrete that toxin. It used to be called the bufotoxin, but I guess we'll have to call it Rhinella toxin now.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that can kill your pets.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for all your information and your help. And if you need more information about invasives, whether they be cane toads or whether they be plant material that you are finding that you don't want in your landscape, contact the Extension office. Ken's there. He can answer lots of your questions, and others are there to answer questions you may have about other issues that you might have on invasive plant materials or insects in the area. So next time, join us for another adventure in Extension. Thank you.